Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/Malicious Compliance. In today's episode, I'll lose my job for clocking in 1 minute late. Hate to do this. Don't want to pay me 7 minutes of overtime? Pay me an hour. Clean it or get out of my house. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. I'll lose my job for clocking in 1 minute late. Hate to do this. Punctuality is a good habit, it shows discipline and commitment. I worked in a warehouse where you had to clock in before your start time. There was a computerized process and you would lose your job if you clocked in late more than twice a year, even if you were only 1 minute late. Now, I pride myself on punctuality, but I was running a bit late for the third time in 10 months. A man's gotta hustle, and I simply called my employer and told him that I was feeling sick and needed to take a day off. My state has paid accrued sick leave. The fallout was that I kept my job. It's been a year since, and I got paid for a full day without working. Our foreman told us once that we weren't getting a raise, but we were getting 2 weeks full pay sick leave, then looked at us and said, "Heard there's a lot of flu about end of meeting. It would be more convenient for people to coordinate on something like this, rather than 80% of people having to cover for the other 20% missing over the course of months." But you were sick of their moronic rule. I had a consulting gig at a company that gave all their salaried employees a 10% bonus if they were on time every day for a week. If you were 1 minute late on one day, you lost the bonus for the entire week. People who knew they were going to be late either called in sick or stopped at the diner for breakfast, then strolled into work an hour late. Our office was on the westbound side of a highway with a grass median. Occasionally, someone coming from the west who knew they would be late if they waited at the traffic light would make an illegal left across the median. I really struggle with the mentality that says to sack people for being late twice in a year. How does it benefit the company, given they'll be losing a trained employee and it will cost them a load of money to recruit someone else, train them up, etc.? I know there have to be some rules to stop abuse of the system, but bad weather, crashes, traffic jams, etc. all occur in life and you can't account for every single one of them. I worked at a place that had 12-hour shifts, and if you missed a day, it was an occurrence. They divided the shift into 4-hour blocks, so if you missed 4 hours, it was a third of an occurrence. The time clock was set up so that if you punched in up to 7 minutes late, it would roll back to the nearest hour. 7 minutes plus would roll forward to quarter after n, which meant you're late, which meant a third of an occurrence. I pulled in one day and didn't get to the time clock until 8 after, which is when I was informed of this rule. So I told my boss I'd be back in 3 hours and 45 minutes, since I was getting dinged for a third of an occurrence, I may as well go big. Don't want to pay me 7 minutes of overtime? Pay me an hour. I'm a nurse and a hospital I worked at early on paid by tenths of an hour, as most do. They were cracking down on OT. They were more than happy for us to clock out up to 7:36, quit time was 7:30, and this meant we didn't get OT, but if we clocked out at 7:37 minus 0.1 hour late, it was a problem. The unit I was on got a new director and became hell. More and more people quit, they couldn't replace them, we became dangerously short-staffed. We never took the 2:15 m breaks. Ever. We usually clocked out for a lunch, because you'd get in trouble if you didn't, never mind you didn't have time, but we had to clock out. About half the time we would have to work during that mandatory lunch, unpaid. What am I going to do? Sorry you're dying, but my lunch is getting cold? Anyway, big OT crackdown came. Our manager told us if we had more than one late clock out, we'd get a verbal, not really verbal because it's documented in file, another late clock out, a written. Then who knows? Now, I rarely clocked out late because I worked my tail off, but about once every other week I may clock out 0.1-0.2h late, but that's because I tried really hard to get out on time. I didn't even want the OT, I wanted to go home. About everyone got a verbal within 2 weeks. She then came back and said if you clock out 0.1-0.4h late then you would get the verbal. However, if it was 0.5h late then they knew something bad happened and would let it go. So all of us that did our best to get out within 0.1 late on bad days? No longer. We took our sweet ass time and we were all clocking out 45 to 60 minutes late. Our documentation was never so perfect. Suddenly they dropped the whole BS. One of the most violated labor laws is, when you are clocked out for an unpaid lunch and you even get asked anything about the job, let alone get up to do work, you must be paid for the entire break. It is a serious fine. Another one is that if there is any rounding on a time clock it must not only benefit one party. I'd bet in OP's case the time clock only rounded in the company's favor. If it was tenths of hours anything 5 to 5:03 should round down to 5 and anything 5:04 to 5:06 should round up to 5:06. The most common rounding I see is quarter hour rounding though. What am I going to do? Sorry you're dying but my lunch is getting cold? That's simultaneously funny and incredibly depressing. Funny is the tone I assume you were writing with, and it makes me depressed that the system regularly exploits you and others in this way. Clean it or get out of my house. Growing up, cleaning was always a major issue at home, especially with my mom. Nothing was ever done to her standards, and this led to a lot of fights. One summer day when I was a teenager, we had a cleaning day, during which my mom told me to clean the bathroom that my sister and I shared, top to bottom. It was my last chore and I cleaned it, but not thoroughly enough. I was asleep in bed that night when my mom burst in, already in a bad mood I guess, flipped on my lights and started yelling at me to clean the bathroom properly. That particular night, I was just too tired and too done with being screamed at, and said I'd do it tomorrow and to let me sleep. This only made her angrier, and she told me to clean the bathroom now or get out of her house. She was likely bluffing, it was something she said often, but for once I felt bold enough to call that bluff. Besides, it was clear that she wasn't going to let me sleep anytime soon. So I immediately got out of bed, grabbed my backpack, hopped on my bike and **kept off. My mom yelled at me the whole way out the door. I biked to my best friend's house, whose mom was more than happy to let me stay over, and I was so emotionally spent that I ended up sleeping till 5 p.m. There wasn't any super satisfying conclusion to this little rebellion. I stayed at my friend's house for 2 days, hanging out and going to the park while still in my pajamas. And immediately after that I was already set to go on a week-long volunteer trip in a different state. My mom didn't text me or otherwise say a word, and when I finally returned home she pretty much pretended like nothing happened. But that felt triumphant enough for me, because I knew there was no way she'd ever apologize or say that she'd overreacted. However, she never played the obey me or get out card again. My mother loved that one too, you till my brother did what you did. He was gone for 6 months though. My sister, dad, and I all knew where he was, but my dad was tired of the BS too, so we never told her where he was, safe at a friend's place who lived a few towns over. He was 17 at the time. That was a big reason I have never said that to my kids no matter how mad I get. Good for you for showing her how toxic she was. So did your mother learn anything from this event? 6 months is a long time. I did that once. Parents tried to make me clean the whole house and do all of the chores by myself while my mom sat around watching soap operas. Just left and walked into town. Hung out with my friend during the day but couldn't stay there. Made a makeshift tent out of a tarp and a rope in a little patch of woods and just slept there for a few days until it started storming. Parents were ticked but never made me do all of the chores by myself again. OMG, my story is so similar. I was just shy of 19 though when I'd finally had enough and ran away. If someone of college age could technically run away, but that's what it felt like after I finally stood up to her. Got into a shouting and shoving match for the very first time in my life. I wasn't allowed to talk back ever, and headed for my friend's house where I stayed until I found full-time employment at minimum wage and got an apartment with a roommate. Which screwed my college plans too. I eventually returned home after my lease was up, but it was my choice and things were much better by that time. I was mostly, by then, treated like the adult that I was. Sorry to go off on my own story, but it all came back like a flood. And that was 37 years ago, and it still hit me. Wow. Your description of your mom sounded so much like her, back then. We're okay now. I wish we could have been closer, but we're okay. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.